Well, it's my pleasure to introduce one of my many bosses at EKU. Mike Austin is the chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion at EKU. He's the co-editor or co-editor of 8 books on things to do with philosophy, like coffee and cycling, and football, and the philosophical significance of these things and activities, and also books about virtue and virtue in everyday life and parenting, right, which is kind of where you get you started. And he's also written 2 books, a book called Wise Stewards and an earlier book about conceptions of parenthood, which are kind of both within Christian theology. The second one is the Wise Stewards book, which is it's a very practical book. Much of his work is kind of focused on the practical applications of philosophy, which can sometimes be abstruse. So it's nice to have people making it relevant to the everyday. So today Mike's going to talk about social media and the pursuit of happiness. And in case you haven't heard it enough, this program was funded in part by the Kentucky Humanities Council and the National Endowment for Humanities. So let's welcome Mike Austin.
No, I'm good, thank you. I'm not sure why John Wade is laughing, but about the practicality of philosophy. It is true. I haven't taught this class in a while, just an intro to philosophy class, but I always tell them the first day about a class I was a TA for at the University of Colorado. And there was this day where the whole class was spent on, I can't remember the name of the philosopher who brings this up, but the professor taught about when you put a stick in water, right, it looks bent because of, and now, then the debate was, well, is a stick really bent and just looks straight when it's out of water, or vice versa? So I try to avoid those in my classes, but yeah, sure. And hopefully Matt will be chair in 2.5 years when my term of service has ended. Yeah, or somebody else. I don't really care who. It's just not me. All right, so we'll jump in now. I looked this up recently. Facebook has more than 1.7 billion users across the world. Remember, it was launched back in February of 2004, so in roughly 13 years, something that didn't exist now has that many. Twitter was launched in March of 2006. There are over 500 million tweets sent out each day, some more notorious than others. And then, fortunately, well, yes, over 70 million photos are posted every day on Instagram, and that's 7 years old. Yeah, this month, 7 years old. So success of social media is undisputable in terms of the numbers of people using it, those sorts of things. And so, of course, philosophers and really anybody, you just want to ask the question, well, why? Why is it so successful? Cynically, depending on the day, I'm more cynical than others, but if you want to be cynical about it, you might think, well, look, it's predicated on our desire to have people look at us and our accomplishments, right? We can show what we've done, what we had for dinner, talk about depends on your stage of life, yourself, your kids, your grandkids, right? Just depends on where you're at, what you want to brag about. But less cynically, and I think this is part of the positive side of the story, is that, look, just human nature is such that we are social beings, right? And so it gives us another means to sustain relationships or form them. So that's good. But I think one positive thing here, and I'll focus more on the negative today because I think that's where a lot more the interesting stuff is, but it does allow us to communicate in ways that transcend these boundaries of time and space, right? So I think back, I lived in Hungary for a year right after college, and I remember my roommate, he would have to, and it would wake me up, right? He would have to talk to his, I guess it was girlfriend, not fiance yet. Like 1 or 2 in the morning, our time would be when she could call him, right? And you could write letters. You had to go write letters and stand in this was before email and that stuff. Go stand in the line. And in 1991 in Hungary, the post office line was quite long and slow. But a year and a half ago, our oldest daughter went to England for study abroad, and pretty good setup. They had classes 4 days a week and then 3-day weekends, and of course she spent a lot of those 3-day weekends traveling all around Europe. And so she was on Facebook posting pictures. So, I mean, almost in real time, you could see where she was and what she's doing. And that's good, right? This isn't really social media, but I remember we would, FaceTime her on Sunday nights sometimes. And when I was a kid, that was like Dick Tracy's little video watch, right? You got to be, that was just science fiction stuff, but it's real. Well, normally when I give this talk with the Humanities Council, it's a lot longer, so you're lucky. I cut out all the fluff, so we'll just get to the good stuff. But I want to look at some of the pros and cons of social media using both philosophy, my own field, and then also psychology, some findings that, of course, in the past 6 or 7 years, a lot more work starting to be done on the impact of social media on we human beings. So some positive ones. I'll do these quickly. I mentioned this. It does allow us to establish connections or sustain them with other people. I grew up in Kansas City, so I think of like my dad's side. He had a lot of brothers and sisters. So my cousins, some of them we keep in touch on social media, where we never would have actually picked up the phone and talked to each other because, I don't know, we just wouldn't. But that's a positive thing. On the positive side, it opens up opportunities for acquiring new kinds of knowledge. My own life, there's this is one of the weird things about social media. Your worlds collide, right? So people that you work with, people you don't know, like I have a lot of philosophers that I've never met in person, but we correspond or interact on social media, and then your family and your friends. So it's kind of like this cocktail party where everybody's there, sort of weird. But it does open up those opportunities. I think of a guy named Paul Moser. He's a philosopher in Chicago, who a lot of things about philosophy and politics, religion, things that I wouldn't have come across maybe without being aware of his work and his opinions. He's one of those people that he's like an online Socrates. He just goads people and bothers them. But anyway, I like that. One other positive thing is that might sound a little optimistic, but I think it's true, and it goes back to the quote earlier in the bulletin about how we post. Social media can act as a catalyst for personal and social change. Now, I said can act, right? Doesn't necessarily, but the potential's there. And this goes back to actually something Aristotle talked about and contemporary positive psychology talks about, that, well, Aristotle put it this way: if you want to be a just person, do just actions. You want to be a generous person, do generous actions. And so you want to be a kind person, do kind actions. He thought of character and virtue as like a habit you cultivate. Similar to other habits, whether it's learning how to hit a golf ball or playing the piano well or whatever it is, right? Just practice and habit. And I think one way, we can try to cultivate kindness, for example, is by, social media is a way to do that, right? Saying, like posting positive things, encouraging others for their accomplishments, and maybe even intentionally not saying something about ourselves once in a while, like something good happens and you don't post. That might be a way to cultivate humility, okay? But let's have more fun and look at the negative, okay? So some negative aspects of social media, and this is where there's more recent psychology. Now, look, there's one thing that happens a lot, and I think we all know this, right? When I first put this together and gave the talk 4 or 5 years ago, it's changed over the years. But the negative stuff we weren't as aware of it. People weren't sick of it as much as they were now. It was still like the shiny new car that it's just exciting. But there is dishonesty on social media, obviously intentional, but I think sometimes unintentional as well. Right? It doesn't give us an accurate picture. I think our lives in the real world aren't the same as they are online. So when I finished my PhD and got a job at EKU back in 2004. Some friends of ours that lived in Colorado, they moved to San Francisco at the same time. So we moved to Richmond, and they moved to San Francisco. This was back when what was there? I'm thinking of the restaurants: Red Lobster, Applebee's, and what's the other one right over there? Not Cheddar's, but Charlie's. Yeah. So it was that or fast food. And then they're posting, all these restaurants and cool stuff they're doing in San Francisco. And so online, it just looked like their life is the coolest thing ever. And we like Richmond now, but at the time, it was not fun. Now later, because we were friends with them, later we talked, and during that time, now they're fine now, but they're going through a little bit of a rough time in their marriage. Nothing horrible, but just it was the online and offline things didn't match up. And it wasn't intentional. And I'm not saying that, although people do this, you should talk about your marital problems on Facebook. But the point is, I think the picture isn't realistic. And even if we know that, and we'll get to this, we can even know that, and it's still somehow in our psychology often it doesn't hit home, right? We still have this illusion about the happiness of others compared to our own. Now, a second thing that social media can do is can encourage narcissistic tendencies. And that's bad, by the way, right? Here's a definition of narcissism: a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and an exaggerated sense of self-importance, okay? So now there's a spectrum here, right? I mean, we all have some of these things to a degree, but right, when you have it to a greater degree, that's a problem, obviously. Jim Taylor, a professor of psychology at the University of Denver, said this about narcissism and social media. He said, technology and social media have done their part to promote narcissism. All of the time spent absorbed in screens has reduced the amount of actual human, but what he means by that face-to-face, interaction that children have, thus depriving them of the experiences needed to develop essential social skills such as empathy, compassion, and consideration for others. So if we think about some of the, well, really any of the controversial stuff, politics, ethics, religion, the stuff that we look at all the time in our department, think about the tone of that conversation and the thought that it could get worse in a generation because of lack of developing these skills. That's a little scary. And what's interesting and still negative is that the actual structure of social media can foster those kind of tendencies, the narcissistic tendencies, right? Because here's the analogy, right? People don't write Christmas letters as much anymore, but we still get them sometimes, but you might have someone like this, you might be someone like this, and if you are, nothing personal, but right, it's the same natural tendency. In your Christmas letter, you tend to talk about, when this was a big thing, all the great things that happened over the year, right? And we had friends that would, their vacation, their kids are the greatest thing ever, right? Life's perfect, and the nice picture where somehow you got everybody to look happy at the same time, right? But sorry, just thinking back to pictures we had to take with 3, young daughters over the years, it was torture, but yeah, right? I mean, it's social media is like this ongoing Christmas letter, so to speak, right? It's just like all the great stuff. And there's something, too, about the structure, and I noticed this both with my students. I also coach soccer with some of the high school athletes that I've coached. Instagram is, right, that's what they like. It's such a big part of their life that you have to actually, as you're doing things, think about yourself. Because as they're doing things, whether it's a game or a party or whatever it is, then they're taking pictures of themselves and their friends. And so instead of being caught up in just in your daily life, there's this other thing in your mind about how can I present what I'm doing now and then get all this positive feedback from my friends. So the idea, I guess the point is we have to think about ourselves more when we are incorporating social media into our everyday life, because we're posting things about ourselves. Does that make sense? I mean, so it's this psychological focus that we have. All right. Related to that, social media can cause feelings of envy. All right. This is a study done published in January of 2013 by a couple of German universities of 600 people. It found rampant envy on Facebook. Right. It gives us a new and really very large platform for social comparison, and that's not always good. The study showed that 1 in 3 people felt worse after visiting the site, and they were more dissatisfied with their lives. And this is interesting. The people who looked around without contributing anything were affected the most. So if you just go on there, look around, don't say anything, then 1 in 3 people felt worse, I guess, about themselves. A study that's related, Utah Valley State, found that the illusion we get from Facebook of constant happiness in the lives of others leads to dissatisfaction with our own lives. Okay? Now, look, that reveals some sort of flaws in human nature. I mean, ideally, if somebody else is doing well, it shouldn't undermine our happiness or make us envious, but right, some of us to a degree or greater or lesser degree have those tendencies. I thought what was interesting from the Utah Valley studies that people that spent more time in face-to-face interactions with their friends didn't have the same, they were less likely to think that their friends had it better, right? So there's something about interpersonal face-to-face interactions with the same people that's different than online. Online, you think they're happier than they are. Face-to-face, there's more realistic. So that's interesting. Another interesting point has to do with distraction in social media. Right? I'm not just talking about texting while you're driving or having to honk at the person in front of you at the stoplight because they're messing around on whatever they're messing around on their phone. Blaise Pascal, a 17th century French philosopher, said this about distraction. He said, "Sometimes, when I set to thinking about the various activities of men, I've often said that the sole cause of man's unhappiness is that he does not know how to stay quietly in his room." And there's something to that. Now, I try to think what century, I'm trying to think in the 17th century, what in the world they had, what was distracting them, right? No internet, right? No smartphones. I don't know. But a study conducted at Harvard, and if it's at Harvard, it must be true, right? There was a study of it's better than Utah Valley State. But there was a study of this, I don't even know how they did it, but a study about distraction and people's everyday lives. And ironically, I think the way they did it is they had an app on their phones that the study people would send them something like an alert, and then they would say, they would rate themselves they would say what they were doing and how happy they were at any given moment. And what happened was people tended to be happier when they were focused on the activity rather than thinking about something else. And in fact, shopping, reading, whatever they were doing, a better predictor of unhappiness was that they were distracted versus whatever activity they were actually doing at the given moment. And so, of course, social media can be a near constant distraction. Sit in the back row of a college classroom, and you'll see that, right? Especially a lecture hall where they can be more anonymous. Not in my class or Matt's, but other professors, right? Like John's class, yeah. No, and so and it's true, right? There's and I teach, you notice the difference in a lot of, from years ago, students would come in and over the course of the semester in a smaller classroom, they're talking to each other. And now it's more common, before class, they're not talking, they're just sitting there, like doing this with their cell phones. So that's not good. Perhaps worse, and I've got time, I'll mention this one too, there's potential for addiction to social media. There are studies that show that in a certain sense, quitting Facebook and Twitter can be more difficult than quitting smoking or giving up alcohol. And you might be like me and think, I find that hard to believe. And I'm sure there are some differences here in terms of the physiological causes. But there's something about the shininess and the lights and the beeps and the attention that helps those is it dopamine? No, I'm a little stepping out. Those receptors fire, right? Makes people happy. There was I'll just do this one study of over 1,000 college students in 10 countries, so it's a wide-ranging study. They had to attempt to go one day without social media or technology, including just their cell phones, right? So the study was they had to turn their phones in to somebody and then go about throughout their day. At any given point during the study, or during the day, they could opt out and get their phone back. Most of them did. But what the study authors talked about, this is strange to me, but the withdrawal symptoms experienced by students deprived of all that stuff, they were comparable to those felt by drug addicts or smokers who go cold turkey. Oh. Yeah, so it's not the same physical addiction, right, to heroin or whatever it is, but the self-reported feelings and the physical. So here's the words students used to describe how they felt: confused, anxious, irritable, insecure, nervous, restless, crazy, addicted, panicked, jealous, angry, lonely, dependent, depressed, jittery, and paranoid. So that's bad stuff. And I did this recently in one of my classes. I was trying to illustrate something, and I took a girl's phone, like a student's. I didn't just swipe it, but I asked for it and took it, and just for a minute, you could just see, and she reported feeling very jittery, right? It's like a part. It's like an extension of the body. So now I think a lot of students are aware of this stuff. So I'm trying not to be like the 48-year-old curmudgeon, although I'm on my way. But it's just the reality, right? That it's so radically different and so pervasive. And I think we're still in this phase of trying to figure out what's the proper place of this stuff in our lives. I mean, I've had students who aren't on any of this stuff, so it's not like it's. Yeah, there's awareness of it, but I think it's. But the norm is just the stuff's integrated so deeply into people's daily lives, whether it's college students or grandparents, right? My own mom is on Facebook saying stuff, posting things on my kids' pages that they don't appreciate. But anyway, well, let's look at some practical advice because, yeah, I do try to be practical. And really, historically, philosophy wasn't just written and spoken by philosophers to other philosophers. It was like trying to take these insights and talk to normal people about them, right? Whether you're thinking about Socrates or even in the early 20th century. But, well, Socrates, right, reported to say, the unexamined life is not worth living. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I think it's a good thing to examine your life, right, in various ways. But I think if we can change that a little bit and think about whether or not the unexamined technology, right, whether or not it's worth using. And so practical advice, I guess I have 4 brief things to say about this. The first one is to be thoughtful, just to be thoughtful and reflective about your own use of social media. I do this to a greater or lesser degree depending on what's going on. But as we've seen, and like really most technologies, it's got positive and negative features, right? It can foster growth in character or undermine it. It can benefit our relationships or harm them. But there are certain values inherent within social media about communication, like the ease of use, the brevity, what other things? Oh yeah, convenience, right, I said that, sound bites, things like that. But actual communication with other people, as we all know, can sometimes be pretty difficult. Right? It's not, and you can't successfully communicate what you want and need to and receive what you need to hear in 140 characters or a Facebook status or something like that. Okay. And moreover, just given what we need as human beings time to be alone, like Pascal said, time for solitude and silence. Immersion in the natural world without like a camera at your side necessarily. And just human face-to-face interaction. What we need, and this is the best term I've seen, William Powers wrote a book called Hamlet's Blackberry, and he said what we need is depth. Right? Human beings need depth, whether it's relationships, interaction in the natural world, time alone. And those ideals, those values need to be protected. Now, social media can help with that, but it tends to undermine it. So be thoughtful about our use of social media. Second is to put boundaries around our use of social media, right? Carving out time to be unplugged, whether it's, so focusing, I'd say this to my kids, they don't like it, but focusing on one thing, not one thing plus your phone, right? The reason it takes you 2 hours to do your homework is because you're switching back and forth, right, between that and your telephone. So some suggestions: have a technology-free zone in the house, right, where you live, or more realistically, maybe just a time. So for us, 2 of our kids are in college, the last one's in high school. It was always the dinner table. Now occasionally they try to sneak it, and then, we'd give them a hard time. Students do this too. I try to make classroom a social media-free zone because my classes are usually smaller, 20 to 35. I still remember this day. It was a smaller room than this, about 30 students, and this kid, he was sitting at his desk, and he had the phone, doing stuff on his phone like this. Now, when I first started teaching, I probably was too afraid to say anything, but at that point, I was like, this is just annoying, right? And so I just asked him, put it away, stop messing around on your phone. And so this is what he does. Instead of doing this, he puts the phone in one hand and puts a hand and I'm not kidding, it was like this high. And then you just don't know if he thinks you're stupid or disrespectful or whatever. But the classroom's a good place to be a technology-free zone, as much as we try to fight that. I put off and on over the last few years, especially being chair because you get a lot more emails. I have a little, where you can put your signature. I used to put in red, and then I made it blue to be less obnoxious. That I didn't say it was a rule, but I said I tend to not reply to email at night or on the weekends because I don't read it. I didn't always keep that rule, But at least then people knew if they sent me something Friday at 7:30 or Friday at 2 a.m., like a student, there's a good chance they wouldn't hear from me till Monday morning. Now, some of you, with your jobs or what you've got going on, can't do that. But if you can, that's an example of something. That's an example of something that William Powers suggested. And that's my third suggestion, is to read his book called Hamlet's Blackberry. It's several years old, 4 or 5 years old, I think. He's been to EKU a couple times speaking. That's a really good short book. Each chapter takes like Shakespeare, or I can't remember the philosophers now, but a different like historical thinker, takes some of their ideas and uses those to interact with technology and social media. So it's a short book, it's a quick read, really interesting ideas in terms of how to put boundaries around this. Yeah. It's Hamlet's Blackberry. Yeah, so that's how you can tell it's old, because it's about Blackberries instead of Hamlet's iPhone, right? But, and so he's part of a study group actually at MIT now. We're looking at some of this stuff. The last suggestion is to actually just take a break for a month from social media, like a 31 or 30-day experiment to see what it's like. And so maybe you'll see whether your life's better or not without it, whether it should play a different role or a smaller role in your life. I would say then use the time for something else, right, that engages your mind or your body in certain ways. So our youngest daughter last year, her iPhone got ruined because she left it on top of her soccer bag at practice, and somebody poured water on it. And she couldn't afford to buy a new one, and we're mean. We weren't just going to buy her a new one. So she had to save up some money. It took her about a month to figure out how to scrape together enough money by selling some things she had. But in that time, she had taken guitar lessons back when she was like in elementary school, and kind of played it off and on. But for that month, she picked it up, played it again, was back in her room playing guitar almost every night. And it's kind of wavered since then. But you get the idea, right, that it's actually, and this is a lot of psychological stuff about this, right, doing things that we get caught up in the experience, a flow experience, getting caught up in music or sports or even the banjo or whatever it is, right, that tends to be more fulfilling for human beings, right? Because it requires something of us compared to the passive sort of interactions we get with social media. Okay, so anyway, you'll benefit from this, right? This 30-day experiment. One of the Susan Moeller, who was the lead researcher of the study where the college students had to give up their phones for a day, she said, this is a quote from her, when the students didn't have their phones or other gadgets, they reported that they got into more in-depth conversations. Quite a number reported quite a difference in conversation in terms of quality and depth as a result. And so I think that's true. I guess I'll close with this, right? It's like any technology, it's wise to think about the strengths and weaknesses of social media. But most importantly, I think we need to let our values, the ones that we have, dictate how we use it rather than letting it dictate its values to us. And I'd left a few minutes for discussion. So if you had questions or something, comments, I'm glad to take those. And if not, that's fine too. Yeah.
When you said to not, go with a month with that, so many of my appointments come through social media now.
Yeah.
And so much political activity.
Yeah, that's right.
Is in social media. And my granddaughter lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I feel very disconnected from family with social media.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe like a cold turkey thing wouldn't work, right? But I think that's where maybe an alternative is just to use it for those kind of things, right? And maybe some of the other stuff. I mean, the political stuff's hard. I tend in my history until the most recent election, I was kind of politically agnostic. I mean, I had people I supported, but the last one I couldn't help myself. I mean, it was just, I couldn't believe what was happening. And so people get, but I guess my point is there's value in all those things, right? And I think it is really integrated in our lives. It's hard to pull apart. If you can take like a cold turkey break, maybe a day, right, or 2 days or something where it wouldn't have that same issue. But yeah, I have the same kind of thing where people contact you through Facebook or whatever because that's easy for them to find you. So yeah, find other ways. Maybe more it's just putting boundaries around at certain times of day or something that you're going to ignore. Yeah, John, and then.
Have you
Yeah. 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 So. Right. Yeah. That's so. There's. Yeah, it can be like positively subversive, right? Or that would be the negative kind. Yeah. So that's a danger too. And I don't know. Yeah, it's still not clear what's going to be done about that, if anything. Yeah, it's another a more social danger, right? Social and political. Yeah. And then,
As I looked at Joseph Best's bookshelf the other day, I saw a number of books on mindfulness.
mm-hmm.
I think this is coming into philosophy too. And it looks to me like that's sort of what you're saying we need to work at and, against social media to be more mindful of what.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, and I think you can even. Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's another way to put some of what I said. Being mindful of the rest of our lives, but even as we're mindful about how we're interacting and using it, right, as well. Yeah, it's just this stepping back and being a little bit more reflective about things, and enjoying our actual daily lives. Yeah.
I wanted to had a conversation Friday with some friends who were talking about media and young children and how they are so involved in looking at the screen with their fingers going that when it comes to actual interaction with a face, it becomes very difficult for them. They don't quite get all of the parameters that go into that in terms of just having a literal conversation with words falling out of your mouth rather than being a conversation on whatever technical thing they're using. And that to me is I'm not going to use the word danger, but to me it's a lack of affect and everything else that goes into that in terms of just relationships with young people.
No, I think that's right, and I think even we're seeing, students. I mean, I've had this conversation with some of my students as they come in now, where they know they're not really good at face-to-face kind of stuff, and like part of what we do in college is trying to just help them do that because they're going to have to be for a majority of career. I mean, forget about just actual human flourishing in your daily life. Just to get a job, you've got to be able to talk to people. Most jobs, anyway. So, yeah, I think that is a danger. Yeah. Yeah.
In my doctoral program, there was actually a student who did their dissertation on mindfulness and its effect on addiction. And the practical implications are that mindfulness, even controlling for the variables of NA or AA, was the strongest component to actually sit with that addiction. So as you mentioned that social media is an addiction, just for students to kind of incorporate being in the moment and observing those perceptions or feelings they're having, rather than trying to be useful, eventually those feelings do subside. And you mentioned earlier about distraction is highly associated with anxiety. That's true with depression, anxiety, ADHD, and just the practice of being mindful, it helps strengthen those connectivities between the prefrontal lobes, which has to do with attention, which attenuates the emotional sense of your brain, like the limbic system. So I think mindfulness is a good approach, practically implement in one's life.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's good. Yeah.
But just when you said people are all the time posting what's good about them or what happened. So if you're going through something bad, that you know, like a good one, what? So what do? Here I am crying today. People don't do that. So do they just don't get on Facebook?
Well, some
What do
people.
they do?
I mean, it depends. Like some people don't, right? They just don't share negative stuff, small or large, and then other people are at the other extreme, right? Where they say things that you think, I only want to say that to like my closest friend, or something like that. So there's the boundaries are weird because some people it's very like the positive is accentuated. Other people use it as either as a therapy session or as a way to just complain about everything or to denigrate you if you disagree with them politically or religiously or morally. But yeah, so I think that's, I don't know. I think either extreme's got problems, I guess. Yeah.
Thinking about that and what you had to say about it, I've noticed closer friends that you interact with daily or weekly, maybe just monthly, they may ask for support. They may not say everything's awful. They may just say, hey, our family's going through some thoughts, or they might say something specific.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you all know such and such, you just didn't depart. So I think that that's a positive.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not saying you shouldn't share the negative or what's going on at all, because I think, yeah, I've seen that too. That can be beneficial. And people, some people can be more isolated, right? And maybe that's, I mean, there are people who, for whatever reason, that might be their primary social contact in many ways. I've got people I only know through Facebook because mutual acquaintances and philosophy and stuff like that have terminal illnesses or things like that, or at least long-term ones where they can't get out of the house. And so a lot of what they're and so that's a benefit. That's a positive thing, I would say. And your example too, as well, right? It's a way to, that can be good. It's just I mean, this is sort of a Aristotelian idea too, but it's trying to avoid the extremes of, you know, my life's perfect and we're all shiny, happy people versus, you know, I hate everyone and everything and my life's terrible, and talk about, you know, your ex-spouse and what they did. You know, it's sort of that, the boundaries kind of stuff can be tricky, right? I've noticed, though, with students, though, too, they'll just say stuff that I mean, of course, I grew up in the 80s. We were a little more uptight, but we wanted to look cool or something. But they're much more open with stuff with their first or second day of class than we would have been a generation ago. There's some good things about that, and some maybe that are a little more, you know, it's not a context where you really know who you can trust and who you can't. So I think that's a carryover from social media, too. They're just used to sharing whatever. Yeah.
A few minutes ago, you used the word empathy.
Yeah.
Use the word empathy. And that seems to be something that I'm hearing more about every day.
Yeah.
And it's something that might be related to the lack of empathy. So the lack of empathy. Say that. Empathy.
Yeah.
The lack of, I need to learn how to talk.
No, that's all right. I do the same thing sometimes.
But anyway, that's something that seems to be changing. I'm hearing more about it every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, me too. I think there's maybe less of that at sort of a baseline level in a lot of contexts than there used to be. And social media isn't necessarily helpful in many ways. It can exacerbate the negative stuff. All right. Oh, one more. Okay.
You didn't touch on this, but I'm sure you have some ideas. One of the things that has made me back away from Facebook and all this stuff is just this big brother thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know everything about us now. And I don't know where you see that headed as far as,
Yeah.
you know, our ability to keep a private life and to be able to, you know, and still be able to utilize some of these things to stay in touch with old friends or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. The data mining and stuff, it's a huge money maker for them, and it's a huge point of access for these large companies that do that. I mean, it was like last week or two, I was at home doing something, maybe on my phone, like looking at looking to buy something, can't remember what it was, and then got on my work computer and like ads for that popped up all over and I'm just like, I get it when it's on the same computer, but it bothers me that somehow and that's just what we know in our face is tracking. So yeah, I mean, I know people, a friend of mine who was in the military, he's not on any of that stuff because of just, you know, he was overseas and, you know, in the Middle East, doesn't want that kind of access around the world. Yeah, that too, work computer. So you just have to, I'm concerned about how much of that happens that we don't know about, and then it's hard to, I don't see a lot of political will in terms of the actual government making laws to rein that in beyond sort of lip service. So, okay, well, on that sad note, thank you very much.